Welcome to Podcast Done For You, the show where we make it as easy as possible for you to make the right choices to advance your podcasting career. So let's get started on the show. The price of a podcast, does it cost too much? Well, that's the key question that I'm going to answer in today's episode of the Podcast Done For You show. Now, this is a question that has come up with me many times, almost on a daily basis. So I thought I'd answer it here today. No preparation, no notes, just going to fire it right at you because you have to ask yourself from the beginning, what is it you are trying to achieve? Because the cost is relative to what you're trying to do. Now, if you are out there and this podcast is nothing more than a hobby, then the cost may be too high. Because for a hobby, well, you don't really want to spend time. And let's define cost from the beginning, right? Let's just get to that. Because cost is not just about the dollars. No, cost is about your time. Do you enjoy doing what you're doing? I mean, if you're going to sit and have a conversation and put it out as a podcast, are you going to enjoy that conversation? Is it a chore? If it's a chore, then the cost is too high. If it's something you love and you're passionate about, then the cost becomes irrelevant because it's something that you feel and you want to give over and share with more people. So that's one thing of looking at the cost. But then the other thing, regardless, again, before we get into the dollars, the cost of the amount of time. How do you find that balance between the amount of time that it's going to take you to do the podcast versus what is actually worthwhile? You have to remember that there's editing involved. Yes, you have to do some editing. You have to put some bits and pieces together. You have to publish and go all through all of those mechanisms to do that. So it's not just about the recording. Now, you can get to a point where you're doing some things and doing it live and you don't put much polish on around it and you try and eliminate those things, but there's still work involved before and after. So the question really is for you, how much time is worthwhile? When it comes to editing, and you will need to do editing if you want to do a polished job. That's what a live environment doesn't allow you to do, some of that polish that you may need, because the chances are you're not a professional and there are some things that you may want to chop and change just a little bit along the way. So if that is the case, then how much time is the right time? What you've got to remember with editing is that for every minute of material that you've got, it's going to take you several minutes to edit it. It doesn't just happen in real time. A 10-minute podcast does not take you 10 minutes to edit. It probably takes you much closer to an hour to edit, maybe even more, depending on how efficient you are and how great you get at the system and how much you need to do. So you have to factor all of those things into the equation and work it out, because it's all very well to sit there and have a 1-hour conversation and now realize that you've got to sit there and listen to it all and make some edits and chops and changes along the way. And suddenly your 1 hour of podcasting and talking about what you want has turned into 6 hours of your time. So again, the cost is as much about the time as well as anything else. And the cost then in terms of dollars becomes, well, if you're just going to do the conversation, then you have to be paying someone else. Yes, someone else is going to have to do the editing and you're going to have to pay them something. Now, there are lots of ways that you can go about all of these things. There's lots of AI and all of those things. But at the end of the day, it all costs. There's dollars involved in it. So when is the cost the right cost? Well, again, I'm going to move from hobby-based podcasts and talk purely about business-based podcasts. You are doing this because you want your business to grow. You want more people to know about how brilliant you are. You want to know about people to know about all of those things that make you unique, so that ultimately people are coming looking for you. Your current clients are really happy to learn more about you and to share more about you. So the referrals are working as much as anything else into the equation. That is one of the great goals of what you want to achieve with your podcast. Now, remember, when you talk about the cost, think of other things in the equation, because yes, On one hand, the podcast costs you in terms of editing, in terms of time, and all those things we've just spoken about. But what the podcast will ultimately do as well is save you time and potentially save you some money as a result of it when it comes to the volume of content that you can then produce to populate various other platforms, from social media to websites to newsletters, emails, all of those kinds of things. You are going to be saving yourself quite a lot of time. If it's you doing it, it's saving you time. If you're paying someone else to do it, you're saving time with them because they now have all of the content ready to go and it's just a matter of publishing. So it's not about writing anymore, it's about publishing. And yes, you have to come talk to me if you want to know how to make that really efficient so you don't have to do any of those things and it's all written for you based on your authentic content in the podcast. But my point here today is to talk about the real cost. And in relative terms, if you look at the amount of time you spend creating content on a weekly basis, whether you do it daily, weekly, or monthly, however you put all of that content together, the time that it takes you is something you need to consider, because the podcast is going to save you a lot of that time. It's going to make it much more efficient and much easier to populate all of those things. Indeed, you are probably, I'm guessing, focusing on one, maybe two social media platforms at the moment. The value of the podcast is that you can focus on multiple pieces of social media and other avenues very, very easily because it can be done in an automated way once you have the content itself from the conversation that is the podcast. So when you look at the cost, actually, you could put it down as saving you money. Yes, money. Because even if you are a sole trader and you're watching this and you are doing everything in the podcast yourself, you are doing everything in the social media yourself, then if you have the podcast and use it properly, then the efficiency that you create is saving you your time. And how much do you value your time? That's a good question to ask yourself as well. Is that if you are not being paid to do something for a client right now, are you worth something? If you are doing something that is going to help market your business, is it worth it to you? Because you can ask the same question about going to a networking meeting. Now, so the problem with a networking meeting is you'll meet 20, 30, 40 people and you won't establish any real relationships and you're amongst 40 other conversations. Whereas the podcast is going to get you in a private conversation with all of those people listening to you. You have a captive audience. So that's a pretty cool thing to have. So again, weigh up the costs. Look at the value of going to something like a networking. I'm not saying don't go to networking, but I'm saying you have to look at what the cost of that is and consider the saving that you're making by driving more people to a podcast. When you go to a networking meeting and you say, hey, come check out my podcast, you're no longer selling, you're much more memorable. You're getting people to engage with you more without having to have the one-on-one meetings. You are saving yourself more time and effort in that way as well. So if you look at it in relative terms, there is a lot of cost saving involved in actually having a podcast. So we're going to come to the question of, is it worth the cost, right? Because there is a cost. But look at it this way. How much time are you saving in social media posting? How much are you getting extra value by being able to post in way more social media platforms than you would be if you had to write it individually? How much time are you saving by making networking more effective and having better conversations? How much are you saving by having something that your clients can share with either their team, their partners, even people in their network much more easily? How much value are you getting out of being able to have conversation starters? Because that's what a podcast can do, is start a conversation. You can send a link to someone you barely know or have just met and say, hey, I'm really interested in your opinion. Find out what other things you can do to start conversations and just mention, hey, it was in the podcast or I'm planning a podcast and I'd like your thoughts. when you start talking about bringing guests onto the program, yes, there is a cost in bringing guests onto the program because there's more time involved in doing it. But you've got to look at as well, are you channeling into their networks? Are you taking advantage of what they offer by bringing them into your world and giving them something to share that is from your world? If you are going to benefit from that, then the cost is worthwhile. Now, we're not going to talk about guests anymore today. There'll be a separate episode, and we have done separate episodes on the value of guests on podcasts, and we'll come back. So we'll come back to that again another time. But do look at all of those things as costs. So now, what does it cost to actually produce the podcast? Well, if you want to know what that is, there are so many variables in the equation. So there are lots of things to add up. There is the equipment, which is largely a one-off cost. And the value of the equipment, of course, is you don't have to use it just for the podcast. If you're having meetings online, as we all do, why not take advantage of the great equipment you've got and sound and look more professional as a result? So you've got the value of the equipment, one-off fee. Now you've got things like software that you have to think about because you have to record somewhere. We've talked about it before. Don't use Zoom. There are better avenues to record than to use Zoom. We're not using Zoom right now. Shout out to Ecamm Live. We're using Ecamm Live for this particular recording. I also use other bits of online software that specialize in recording for a podcast. You also need software that is going to help you do the editing. You need to pay for an editor if you're not paying yourself to be able to do that editing job. You need to be able to look at who's going to do voiceovers, who's going to do graphics. There's a lot of costs that are involved in all of this, and they start mounting up. But here's the big but. You have to look at whether you are getting the value out of it in terms of putting your business in a different position, because then you start looking at all of these costs that might mount up and wonder whether you are going to get clients out of it long term. Well, the answer is yes, you are, if you use all of the content in all those multiples of way. And so if you do that, the cost of the podcast becomes very incidental. But I would challenge you on the cost of doing it yourself. I have yet to see a model where it really works for someone to do the whole podcast, everything, voiceovers, the works themselves and make it work. Because if you do that all yourself, one of the things you are also considering is something we've talked about in previous episodes, which is about who is going to be the host and who is going to be the expert. If you are trying to be both of those things, it is a mistake and it will be more costly and your podcast will fail. We've talked about that in previous episodes, so I won't go into it more here, except to say you then have a cost of looking, do you have a co-host so you can be the expert on the show, and that is your sole role. So all of those things are there to be thinking about. I will tell you this, the cost is 100% worthwhile when you consider the value that it brings to all of those other areas of the business. You have to look at what does it cost for you to get a client, a new client? What is the cost and value to you of retaining clients, of having more referrals? All of these things can be achieved by a podcast, particularly over time. It is not some kind of magic bullet that is going to solve your problem immediately. No, it's not. But in terms of long-term brand building, the cost is 100% worthwhile if you do it right. And that is the challenge I'm giving you today, is the cost of doing the podcast. There's lots of factors in the equation, but the real cost is only going to be measurable once you have worked out all of the variables. So things like who is doing what and how long your podcast is going to be, how often it's going to come out. All of those factors come into the equation, and how professional you want it to look and feel as well. Once you answer all of those questions and you have a cost, what you have to sit down and work out is what it is saving you by the output that it is generating, and what ultimately is the gain, both in the short and particularly the longer term. If you look at, on average, over a 3-year period, the value of a podcast, are you going to win more clients out of it? Absolutely. Are you going to Are you going to retain more clients and expand the use of what you can do with those clients? You absolutely are, because the podcast is educating consistently, because it's not just about the podcast, it's about so much more. So the real cost of a podcast is not doing it. That's what I'll tell you, is that's the end result of all of this. What is the cost of not doing it? Flip it around, because we can talk about all of these variables and the dollars that might be associated with it, and we can talk about the time. All of those things, I can tell you hand on heart, 100%, the podcast is worth it. So what's it worth to you to not be doing it? Pause for thought. Because right now, your competitors are doing the podcast, but are they doing it well? Are they positioning themselves as the expert? Are they using the content in a manner that is efficient and driving more and more people towards you? You can do that. It's not difficult. The cost of not doing a podcast is way higher than the cost of doing it. Podcast Done For You is all about making that possible for you. By all means, check out the show notes for links to how to get in touch with me. Check out the show notes for a downloadable booklet that gives you some information from this podcast and some action steps for you to follow, because there's another value in the cost of a podcast. It gives you material that your clients can use, and you can start building a database. Yes, I'm collecting your information by simply asking you to download it, but there's value for you in downloading it as well. So there's lots of information in the show notes about how to get in contact with me. If you've got anything that you would like us to cover in future episodes of the podcast, please, by all means, get in touch with me. Lots of exciting things are planned and coming up for Podcast Done For You show. Don't forget to like, share, comment, and of course, subscribe so you never miss an episode. We look forward to your company next time on Podcast Done For You show.